can come and sit down. We're going to start the artist talk now. So this is Sunil Garg. Okay, his works, the Sleep Fragment series, is in the small gallery over here to my right, as you've seen.
How did you call it?
Sleep Fragments. Yeah. And he's going to give a presentation just on his career and what led him to basically work the way that he does, use the materials that he does. So I'll let him take it over.
Thanks. Hey, Norton. How are you? Well, thanks for coming. I know it's Saturday. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and I guess the best way to describe me to some extent is that I'm a non-traditional artist. I didn't have formalized art education other than working in India with apprentices, as an apprentice with a bunch of different sculptors and musicians and textile fabricators and people like that while I was going to college, because there was no formal art education in India. So, so just very, very quickly, just a little bit about me. I grew up in a typical Indian family, I guess. This is me about 10 years old in the middle. My family lived in a typical mud hut, right? I mean, everybody in India lives in these broken down mud hut types of places. This was our mud hut. The family had absolutely, we were just very totally downtrodden. There's my grandfather next to Indira Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru back in 1946, 47. And we had typical pets like elephants and things like that in the house to play with. Now, why do I show these slides? It's not to talk about, well, of course, talk about where I come from. But from a time perspective, at that time, families like mine in India, you didn't become an artist. You patronize artists, but you didn't become an artist as for a living. So even though I was always interested in music and played music since very young, and I did a lot of art, I did sculpture, I did, but these were the days, and I'm not that old, but these were the days where there was virtually no paint even available in India. You had to make your own. So that's how we apprenticed and learned how to mix color and paint, etc. And then after gap of many, many, many years, I became what my wife, who's here, calls me a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, in the sense that I came to the US about 44 years ago to get a PhD in chemistry, which I have, and practiced. Then I went to law school, either a glutton for punishment or just a curious kind of a person. And then ultimately, just before I started doing art full time again, and I was a painter in India, I actually ran one of the largest garbage plants, and that's about 4,000 tons of garbage behind me on the floor of this facility that I ran.
Where was that?
In New Jersey, in Rahway. 700,000 tons of garbage a year we handle.
Where does it go?
Well, this plant, we actually had a waste to energy plant, so we burned the garbage to make electricity. We had a 45 megawatt power plant. We fed the grid. It was actually a very good business. Sitting in the middle of Union County, New Jersey, across from Staten Island, virtually no pollution. But there was, and we can get into the whole politics of garbage and garbage burning. There's both an art and a science and politics and everything that goes into it. But I did this for about 6 years, and it was a fascinating experience, from a learning perspective. And then at one point my contract, as it was expiring, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was always doing a little sculpture here and there. I started to do some sculpture, took some classes at the National Academy on Fifth Avenue. And in about August of 2013 or so, on one of the pieces I started putting some light on it. I had not thought about working with light till then. And this number, which many of you, or maybe most of you will recognize, is the speed of light in complete vacuum. Now, why is...
But it says meter second, which should Kilometers second?
No, that's meters per second. It's meters? Yeah. Yeah. Kilometers would be if you went into hours, yeah. It's 288,876,562.
Oh, yeah, it was
Yeah.
million.
Yeah, yeah. So, why light? As you see, I mean, we are looking at such wonderful work from other artists who are using light as well, and certainly my work, which is very dependent on light. Well, from a scientific perspective, people say speed of light is independent of the motion of the observer and of the time and place. And that sounds very illogical, but the thing is, it's a very paradoxical thing to work with as a medium. We look at it all the time, but of course Einstein, we just celebrated the 100th anniversary, or 100th year since the special theory of relativity. He said, well, it is logical if you give up orthodox assumptions about the absolute nature of space and time. So it's a very kind of a complex statement, but it's also a very artistic statement, right? Because artists are dealing with issues of light and space and time, actually. Because whether you're a painter or not. And as a result, I kind of just say, what do I do? What do I do? Well, I like to think or believe that I paint and sculpt natural and computer program light with or without color, combined with reflection, movement, and shadows. And the idea is to invite viewers, such as yourselves, and even perhaps myself at times, to give up our orthodox assumptions about thoughts and dreams and sleep and entropy and energy and a lot of these things that we live with. Because as a scientist, if you think about physical existence, almost all of it is based on completely abstract concepts. Because the concept of entropy, the idea that total amount of chaos in the universe is always increasing, that is the valid state. And I guess looking at the election this year and in the United States and all, we can actually start believing that that's true even in social constructs. But really, what is energy? We can't really define energy. We can define a unit of measurement of energy. And as scientists and as humans, we have figured out how to measure certain things, but the very existence of the fundamental concept on which that's based is impossible to describe. And that's why a lot of scientists, if you read a lot of books and interesting books, and I am reading a book on light right now, the whole idea of what light is has a very spiritual, starting point. And we can get into that for a very long time as to how light became, originally it was a religious concept, right? I mean, Plato said in the Republic, he says, I think it's book 6, I haven't read, it's been a long time since I actually looked at it, but I do remember this particular portion, this particular thing about light, that you have color in everything, but you can't see color unless there is light. But then the question is, what is light? And I guess that's what excites me about working with light. Now, why do I work with light? I mean, I didn't start out working with light, but then when I started working with it, I got kind of interested in it. And it's maybe because I lived my early life in India with virtually, in fact, no manufactured electricity. We had no electricity. I'm not that old. I was born in 1952. I'm 64 years old. There was no running water, and there was no electricity. Even in that wonderfully crafted, hand-carved house, which was on 60 acres and all that kind of stuff. It just wasn't there. So we lived with natural light. We experienced all the shadows we had. We enjoyed the subtle colors and shapes of the trees and the sky and the clouds and the seasons. I lived on that way till I was about 7 or 8 years old. And we looked at the sky at night and experienced the stars in the galaxy.
Did you use candles?
Actually, there was no wax even. So we used earthen pots with mustard oil, or sometimes a little kerosene that was available. But most of the time, once the sun went down, you had very limited time. We lived with the sun. Even today, I get up at 4:30. It doesn't matter how dark a room is. It's so ingrained that the sun is rising and my body just wakes up. It's bizarre. So the 1 hour, and I mean, here is the Milky Way. I remember seeing the Milky Way with my eyes. Now, I dare any of you to do it in New York City with all the pollution, light pollution we have. But I remember seeing this because we used to sleep outdoors. You know, in the summertime particularly, it was 100 degrees. And we had cots that were this high, and they had barbed wire because we had cobras and snakes every so often. Sounds very strange, but it is real. And, you know, we would lie there, and my grandmother and one of my aunts were just absolutely wonderful astronomers. They knew the sky. They could tell you every constellation, how it moved. I mean, that's how I learned science, believe it or not. I didn't go to school formally until I was 11 years old. During that period of time, this is the education. And then perhaps this is the first piece. I mean, there is a lot. You know, Paris is the city of lights, but India, we have a festival of lights, right? Diwali. This is the house I was born in, actually. It's not the house that I showed you earlier. It's a different house. And on the night of Diwali, we would decorate. It's a family occasion. So each of these points of light is actually a little earthen pot with a handmade cotton wicks with mustard oil or some other type of oil. Always vegetable, never, you know, animal-based. And you would light those. And if it was too windy that night, you know, tough luck. Otherwise, these lights would dance, of course, just with a little bit of breeze. And so this is sort of my as early as I could go back and think about how working with light started becoming so important. But, you know, most of this was. And then the other thing I think that when I started thinking about it is that light actually is a democratic medium, right? It's available to everyone, in essence. It is always there, at some place or the other on Earth. The shadows are always there. And, you know, that makes it a fairly unique medium, actually. You know, so we have this whole huge history of shadow puppetry and using natural light and creating, you know, even in a room like this, look at just the wonderful light that's leaking through, because it really permeates everything. And then, of course, for Hindus, it's, you know, I mean, again, getting into spirituality, the word guru. Now, how many of you know what the genesis of the word guru is? What does it actually mean? It doesn't mean these guys on television or gals on television who talk whatever they feel like talking. I mean, it literally, anybody has any idea? The word gu and ru combined together means literally one who banishes the darkness. Gu is darkness and ru is the banishment of darkness. Because in the Hindu thought, light is vidya, or knowledge, and darkness is avidya, or lack of knowledge. And so there are these meditative exercises that sometimes you can do. If you sit in a completely dark room with no light at all, and you light a very, very, very small incense stick with just a red dot, and you concentrate on it for an hour or two, you start seeing everything again, because the eye adjusts. Because even a small amount of light banishes all darkness, banishes all ignorance, in essence. That's the sort of the spiritual basis in Hinduism. And as a democratic medium, we all share it. We rarely think about it. It's a pure medium. You can't really pollute it. It can pollute. It can be polluted. I guess it can be polluted now that we know from particulate pollution. But it is site-specific. It is subject to the environment. It is chromatic. It's very paradoxical because it's both wave-like and particulate. And it's both acute and chronic. You know, you can have, like, we have pieces here which are pulsating and interactive, so they're very acute, but it's also very chronic, as many of the other pieces which are lit all the time, you know. And we have visible light. Now, but the thing is that humans, on some level, are almost blind, right? Because if you think of light as electromagnetic spectrum, which it is, visible light only occupies a very, very small part of the total electromagnetic spectrum that we have. And of course, we use all of these things to see, in essence, right? Radio astronomy and microwaves and infrared astronomy and, certainly looking with X-rays. My PhD dissertation was about scattering of X-rays at very small angles from solutions of proteins. Very, very esoteric area, but there is so much information if you know where to look and what to see. So seeing a light is not just about what you visibly can see, it is about everything else. Gamma, all the way from gamma rays up to radio waves, and you must simply, our eyes occupy just that particular portion. And that, I think, makes it kind of interesting. So, at this point, so that's really sort of my synthesis of why light appeals to me in a very short period of time. But in terms of my art, I just put three. There are many, many. Obviously, the traditional light artists or more established light artists like Terrell or Irwin or Flavin and others. Of course, they set the tone. But Ruth Asawa, Ted Spania, and Yayoi Kusama, and of course Yuko Ni. As I said to Yuko, I said there are two Japanese women on that list, but there is the third one who has been inspired enough to put a light-based show here. Now, I don't know if you know Ruth Asawa, but you will see if you look at this piece, and you'll see some of her work. So she died recently, 4 or 5, maybe a little longer than that. This is actually a picture here. She was one of the Japanese who was interned during the Second World War, and up in Minnesota, of all places. And I think when she was there, she started to keep her sanity and things, and also because she was artistically bent a little bit, actually weaving from wire. So these are actually hand woven. These are not constructed like my pieces are, which are constructed from available mesh already. And that's her a little much older. And I just find these forms very fascinating to look at, and just the way they're designed, and the work that, apart from the work that goes into it, just the idea of the movement that is there. I mean, they're hanging pieces, so they move, but they're bubbling, and very striking work. Ted Spania, I don't know if any of you know, he was a photographer who was one of the first ones. He would call himself more than that, a scientist also. He wasn't trained as a scientist. He was one of the first people who started photographing himself sleeping in the late 60s, early 70s. With analog devices, he constructed a thing on top of his bed, and he was taking time-lapse shots every 15 minutes of him sleeping. And it's interesting, later on, he started photographing a bunch of other people. There's a book that Rizzoli put out 2 years or 3 years ago called Sleep by Ted Spania. It's all, as Rizzoli does, it's just hundreds and hundreds of photographs. So this, for example, is a night cycle, right, every 15 minutes. But since I'm kind of interested in the idea of sleep, you will see like one of the pieces there is, I look at these pieces and I kind of like the shapes and the way people are moving around, and the piece on the left-hand side there, which is like a partial human figure with some of this kind of things, and as it's moving. So that's sort of the connection between some of those pieces and Spania's work, the idea of sleep and what happens when you sleep and what happens when you wake up, kind of thing. And then, of course, Yayoi Kusama, who did the obliteration series with dots, but this, of course, is part of her infinity series, done with a whole series of mirrors. And then, if we go back and take a look, see how close it is to the Milky Way. And that's one of my pieces that is 16 feet long and done with ultraviolet light in like about a 365 nanometer range, which is a wavelength that the human eye cannot see, so all you see is what is being sensitized. But it's really sort of trying to bring that connection of those images in the head of what the Milky Way looked like, in the middle of the night. And then I'll just run through a few of my other pieces, installations that I've done, in dark, in other rooms. This was a photographer who had. Is this okay? Not in your way there?
Yeah.
A part of an installation I did in Key West, Florida, which actually was lighted up at night. Part of an installation above is the day view, at the bottom is the night view, and you can see I just showed 2 still photos, but it's a 5-minute program that I wrote, which changes over a period of time, over 5 minutes, and has a message in Morse code programmed into the lights themselves. Again, a combination of visible and ultraviolet light. So this was part of a fairly large installation I did, which, as you can see, is very reminiscent of Mieko Sama's. She was doing it for a different obliteration purpose, but this is basically using ultraviolet light with paper dots, fluorescent dots of 3 different sizes. There's another of the same installation. This was about an 80-foot installation with about 7,000 dots.
So what were the dots about? What's the topic?
Well, why the dots and why this?
Yeah.
So, in India there is this whole style of ephemeral art, right, called Rangoli, where sand paintings people do, and most of them are done with little pieces of dots, just pieces of color, little drops of color flower of various kinds, and that's really what the inspiration was. The design is basically an abstract design to some extent. It just was kind of interesting on the wall. I photographed it and started doing some sketches. I wish I could show you the 360-degree video so you would see there is a theme to it, as to how it evolved. But this was a very short-term installation. I'm wearing the T-shirt. I also like working with chromatic shadows. So this is really creating some chromatic shadows off a single object in the front. Lately, I've been sort of experimenting with creating tubes, flexible tubes of light, which are also programmable, so that the colors will change as time goes on. These are based on protein conformations and things. So if you look at lots of protein conformations and see what kind of empty space and negative spaces there are, those are what I'm trying to do here. And that's sort of just a run through the kinds of things that I'm doing. And if we have time, I can show the little documentary.
Yeah, go right ahead.
That.
So we'll wrap up with that.
Yep. Sorry.
Do you want to just let everybody know what it is?
Yeah. So this is a documentary that, a very short, 3 minutes, that a filmmaker did in Key West, Florida, when I did my installation there about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. His name is Quincy Perkins. Grew up in Key West. Interesting guy. Just this past summer had one of his short films shown at Cannes, and has been getting quite interesting. I was quite happy that he came by and asked if I would let him film.
My name is Sunil Garg. I was born in 1952 near New Delhi, India. Ever since I've been a child, I've always been fascinated by dreams and really that time that's between sleep and awakening. scientist by training, and then I ultimately studied law and practiced law. To me, the piece represents the ever-changing nature of thoughts. Thoughts are what we live on. They're very important to our psyche, human psyche, but they're also totally abstract. They don't have mass or at least energy in the way we understand them in physics. I have no idea of the sense of time over which these cycles happen, but I think that there are memories or there are recollections which are longer and more concrete, and then there are others that are more fleeting. What I call sleep fragments, because when you look at the scientific side of sleep, there are these long segments that could be called fragments, and where the mind is doing different things. What is this stream of consciousness that we are experiencing is very important because it sets the day, the tone for the day. If you get up in the morning and you have negative quote-unquote or troublesome thoughts, that frames how the rest of the day is going to be, or maybe the rest of quite a bit of time. So the piece is designed to be continuously changing, to offer a stimulus to the viewer, to trigger their own thoughts.
That's the end of it. Thank you.
Okay. So, let's
happy
take
to.
a few questions for.
Sorry, it was a lot of, I know it was a lot of stuff over a very short period of time, but
But it's great. It really gives us an insight into your process. So we'll take a few questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, when I was in 1980s precisely, I was traveling to Southeast Asian countries such as Thailand, Burma, everywhere in that area. Amazingly, those people guided me. It was just remote countries, guided me to go this place and that place, and I can hardly see. And I noticed that they have such a sharp vision. We are so used to with artificial electricity, and unless we have light, flashlight or something, cannot see anything, but they are pointing out, don't you see this and that?
yeah.
This is what contemporary people lost the capacity of being able to distinguish from one to the other.
Well, vision is something that you can lose, right? I mean,
easily. Another thing is, in Thailand, I noticed nobody. That was 1980s, and before tourists would start coming. So all the women in sari, beautiful, holding pieces and vegetable eggs on their head. And then I went to the beach, beautiful beach, and I saw the men. He looks like a very wise man, So I got talking. There was somebody who can interpret for me. And then he said, I am age 85 years old. What are you doing? I said, he said, hey, I'm picking up something. Okay, fine. So how come you don't wear eyeglasses? And in my country, our age, people don't wear. So then I noticed also we wear eyeglasses. We lost the capacity to see. So those are the things that artificial light, which you mentioned, it is a democratic medium that we enjoy.
right.
And now I start thinking about.
I was really talking more about the natural light as a democratic medium.
You see, interesting thing that I start thinking of when I start curating this job. The light is what we always make distinctions from one object to the other, and shadows as well. But when the light became a medium, and then we have to darken the room to appreciate the art, which is your work and those, right? And so only in the darkness we can see the light work. And then it is also the illusion too. So it became a concept of fine art using the white really changed how we don't need light.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Monet's, I mean, that whole series of, I don't know how many there were in the Cathedral series, I guess nobody precisely knows, maybe 32 or 33, that he painted over, 3 or 4 years of different light. I mean, it's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
That, but Terrell said, I mean, we were talking about the other day, when you paint light, when you paint an image, a picture, it's not light, right? It's a record of seeing.
That's right.
It's a record of seeing as opposed to light as a medium. And I mean, he is more of a philosopher than anything else, obviously.
Well, impressionistic painters, they defined the prismatic colors, and then in order to make purple, you put red and then blue, so that our eyes
Right.
illusionistically see,
Right.
by dotting goes together.
Yeah, the thing about light is that you are really, I mean, so most painters, when we paint physically, right, we are looking at the subtractive theory of color, in essence, which is different than light theory, right, which is an additive theory of color. So your primary colors are red, green, and blue, as opposed to red, green, and yellow.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's sometimes it's a little shift in terms of how you look at color. And I mean, I obviously use a lot of color in my work because I grew up in India, and color is everywhere, and I think that's just part of the thing. But you're right.
Okay, my question is, I haven't written a question. Now, I see by looking at your videos, and then you came to make this talk. So, you are using the light sources, and then please explain to them what these light sources are, and then you use fan to make the movement like wonderfully mobile, like in nature.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. So
how did you become this light source?
well, so there are two ways you can generate light primarily. There's the what is known as the incandescent or a hot body radiation, right, which is what most people were used to with incandescent light bulbs, where you heat an object and the heat gets you to a point, the Edison light bulb. But of course, there you're losing about 60-70% of your energy in heat. And then there is the emissive form of light, which is what light emitting diodes are, and I think almost all work here is using light emitting diodes, which is very, very good. Interesting, I mean, it's interesting that light emitting diodes, which are an emissive form of light, where almost 90% of the energy gets converted to lumens, and it generates very little heat. So when I first started putting light, I was actually using, large, cans like I think Norton is using there.
Light bulb.
Yeah, light bulbs, big focusing. But because I wanted color to change the gels and all of that stuff and just the heat, and so I started looking for another source. Maybe belatedly, I didn't really know much about light emitting diodes at that time, other than looking at the red and the green on your cell phone or things like that. Because remember, about 2 years ago, the Nobel Prize in Physics went to the inventors, two principal inventors, although there were many involved, of the blue LED. Because till blue LEDs came into play, which was only about 25 years ago, you could not create white light. Because red and green alone don't give you that. You need the blue to mix in equal quantity. And so now you see an immense technological leap forward in what light emitting diodes are able to do. Even compact fluorescents are gone, right? So I started gravitating towards, and the reason those lights those are actually basically Par 64 cans that are used in theater. Because those pieces are about, that kind of work is about 3 years old. You know, I still do it, but it's, that's about 3 years old. But my fundamental idea is that I don't want the work to be complex. I mean, it may be complex in the way you view it, but in terms of the process, I want it as simple as possible. So there is no real heavy-duty computerization. There is, as you say, I use a fan because if the piece can be moved outdoors, the natural wind will move it. Those things are simply programmed on a very simple, DMX loop, which is sitting on the lights themselves, and they're fixed in place. Some of the more newer work I'm doing that I was showing just a few images, I actually have, what are known as, pulse width modulating computer chips that are about that size, that I individually program the red, green, and blue colors through fairly simple software, so that you can create any number. When you look at it, it's 256 times 256 times 256, which is 16,498,000 colors that you can create from mixing those three, which of course the eye can't even see. So, but the point is, if you do it very gradually, I mean, Terrell's installation in the Smithsonian, which was in the middle, in the Guggenheim, in the middle of the rotunda, was kind of interesting. I don't know what technology he used. I don't think he used light emitting diodes, but the gradual shift of the pinks and things is very deceptive, but also very, in my view, very endearing, because it changes the environment, but in a time, because the human mind actually can remember, even the best human in the frontal lobe, you can remember about a 2-minute time cycle or cycle if you train your mind. So anything longer than that is going to look new, unless you look at it 1,000 times. So that's part of the other idea of creating pieces, that the pieces are not going to look the same. You have 2 or 3 light sources, each with 181 light emitting diodes, and the movement of the piece, and the asymmetric nature of the way it's programmed. And we can do the math, but suffice it to say that in real time, none of these pieces will present the same to you from the same spot where you're standing, something like 6,000 years. It may look familiar, but it will not. But I think I'm, thank you very much. Anybody else?
We can move on. So next we're going to have the artist Norton, who has 3 pieces in the back section of the gallery right there. So he's playing clearly with light and shadow, and he's going to discuss a little bit about his process and everything like that.
Yeah, I don't have a slide presentation.
So if everybody wants to move over to Norton's area of the gallery.
Of beauty. And my parents are wonderful, were wonderful people, amazing, but again, no sense of wonder. But in Japan, all of a sudden my eyes got completely blown out. And wandering around into the temples, the landscape, you see how just the smallest detail on a door became an object of wonder to me. So my whole life got skewed from that point on. And then I moved from Japan back to Washington, D.C., back to Waco, Texas. Then I spent my last 2 years of high school in Turkey, which gave me 4 different high schools. So we did a lot of moving. But also all that moving meant that you have very fragmented friendships, a lot of time spent by yourself going around, driving cross country in those days with my parents going, "Be quiet back there, be quiet, be quiet." So we had to find ways to keep occupied, not you, you're okay. We had to find ways to keep occupied, which meant drawing and everything. So my last 2 years was spent in high school in Turkey, where it was Vietnam War. My dad, who had been military all his life, wanted me to go into the military. I thought about it. I took my naval ROTC exam figuring I would fail it, but I just don't know how to fail a test. So I passed it. He was very, very happy, and then he didn't speak to me for 2 years after that because I told him I wasn't going. So I went back to Texas when my family decided to retire in Waco because they'd been through there several times. They had a beautiful house there. And I went to school at University of Austin, Texas, and I decided to make my dad proud. My first year I would take anything but an art class, and I took all the surveys, Phi Beta Kappa, aced everything, just but bored out of my mind. I couldn't take it. So I told my dad I was going into art, and he said the last and only thing negative about it, he told me he'd buy me a pink tutu. But from that point on, he was supportive. It was, yeah, I know. Can't you just see me in a tutu? I am so graceful. So, did that for 4 years. Did that for the next 3 years. University of Texas again, aced out. Did so well my last week of school. I decided I'd just eat mushrooms the whole week and go through classes. So, it was a great time to be in Texas. And then I spent the next 2 years living in a small town called Buda. It was 500 people, literally built on one side of the railroad tracks. My brother was with me, my best friend, 3 men, my brother's new baby because his wife abandoned the baby. So it became 3 men, a baby, and a menagerie because we all worked for the Humane Society. We had owls, raccoons, rabbits. I mean, actually, my niece's birthday is today. She just turned 45, so this was a long time ago. Remembering the time when the raccoon got loose, chased her out of her second-story window, and she's hanging by her fingertips. She was probably 2 at the time. So we had cockatiels, cockatoos, 2 different types of monkeys, a deer. It was really a blast. And then I moved from that to New York, which was slightly different, to say the least. New York in 1976 was the best place to live. It was Lower East Side, all burned out buildings. It was like Dahlgren's book, Delaney's book, Dahlgren, all burned out buildings and gangsters. I mean, walking the streets was fun. And then I was an artist. I completely immersed myself in it. I had the best time, made lots and lots of work, moved around, lived in Tribeca, lived in Soho, lived in Chelsea, kept getting moved out of all the best neighborhoods. Taught steel sculpture at Columbia for 10 years. Was doing good. Was almost made the chairman 1 year. But then I got married and we had a baby, and that's actually the course of my life now. Still dealing with that because my ex went crazy, kidnapped my kid, disappeared for 10 years. So I lost my son for 10 years and was completely off the wall. I mean, I literally didn't sleep for 3 years. As you can see, I'm still quite normal. And so right now my work still deals with shadows and voids because that's what my life still deals with, the voids. So you'll see here, this is an image I found from like a 1960s National Geographic, these little boys playing with spears in New Zealand. And they were training to be warriors. And this piece is called Mission Accomplished. So I always say thank you to George Bush. Because I was also raised to be a warrior, although I was anything but. I mean, I didn't get big. I mean, I was always tall, but I didn't get big until I started after school, doing calisthenics, yoga, weight training. My first job in New York was teaching calisthenics, yoga, and weight training. I was working out 14 hours a day. I was a freaking monster. I had shoulders like coconuts. I had guns. Now I've got derringers and peaches, but that's okay. So what I've done here is I leave the person, this child here, you'll see there's another one back up there, there's another elbow coming off here. Those are left as silhouettes so that you can fill that void with your own shadow if you so want, but also that is just a void in my life. And what I do is automatic drawing from then on. I have the idea of what the shape is, but I don't know what I'm going to fill this with. But you'll see there's a lot of calligraphy in here that's reminiscent of my time spent in Turkey, because I was so blown away also by, you go to Hagia Sophia, you go to all of those. I mean, we go to church, my folks were Lutheran. You go to church, it's really dead. Really dead. I mean, the inside of the churches are not inspiring. But you go to a mosque, like Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and it's, you know, miles tall, and the space has the most amazing resonance. And you get to watch, you know, if you ever got to see the dancers that do the spinning. Now we're talking, you know, I learned in Japan and in Turkey more about spirituality. Also why I can't handle racists. It's like, come on guys, there's more out there. So what I do here is I just let my mind wander where it's supposed to go. And I just connect with my history. And I just start drawing. What I do is I take a Dremel and I carve lines in the back of this plexiglass. So also, I make a lot of mistakes. Obviously from my life, you can tell I've made quite a few. But I've learned to deal with it. So there's millions of mistakes within here, but overall you can't tell that because you don't know they're there. But each line is carved. Now if I do something like unplug this sucker, no, you're okay, Doctor. You're okay.
No, I think it's the orange.
Yeah. If I unplug this, all of a sudden, there's no drawing left. It's gone. Even in normal daylight, a lot of this disappears. Because what you're looking at are the shadows that I cast upon the wall, which are basically the memories of the lines that I've carved. So you don't see the line itself. What you look at on the wall is the memory of the line that I carved. Now watch me blow this line out. So that's what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with memory. I'm dealing with the translation between here and there, because the drawing is here, but you can see it's way back over there. And it's the same thing with these little ones. These ones here are also just kind of like little sketches. Most of what I do the last couple of years has been on a really stupid scale. I make pieces that are, you know, that would fit this wall really nice. They're 7 feet by 20 feet. I'll do 4 pieces. And I work for the Whitney. I'm really blessed to work for an amazing organization like that. I was also running the cruise at PS1 for 3.5 years. I was in director of installations there. Those people are mean. At the Whitney, Adam, the director, is a hugger. I mean, it's a wonderful. This gentleman here, David, I work with. They're just wonderful people. You can't beat it. And I need family. I need nice people in my life. But I go every day in the subway, and at the 6th Avenue L train stop, there's all those tiles that are all broken and decayed. And I was seeing that every day, and also watching the people, mostly talking to their phone. You know, everybody bathed in the white light. And I went down and I shot several hundred photographs, and I came back and I transferred those into a line drawing on paper on my wall. And first off, I just did, you know, the 5 foot, I did a 7 foot by 10 foot piece. Did the drawing, did the carving. That took me 6 months, because it takes literally 20 minutes to carve about this much, you know, and I was doing 7 foot by 10 foot. And so that took me 6 months, working full time, working at home every night, every weekend. I'm slightly obsessive. My girlfriend used to like that. But I'm slightly obsessive, and I just get in there, I carve. And after 6 months, I thought, brilliant, I'm done. This is good. And then I'm looking at the wall, and it's not finished. I have to do another 10 feet, because it's not the full story. So I go back, and I finally, after 1 year, finished that piece, and it's called Ghosts in the Machine. And you see it, you look at my website, or even here on their website, they've got one picture of it. And I finally finished that piece, and, you know, again, it took 1 year of constant carving, and it is people in the subway, standing there, not interacting like they do in New York, and we are all just ghosts stuck in our machine. And then I went on doing the second one. And then life got interesting again, because one of the men I work with, Chris Ketchy, does these really, he's married to a Japanese woman, so we have things we understand. He's got this piece that's 10 feet by 24 feet, made out of these little blocks of wood that he makes in his small apartment, and he had never seen. He just photoshops it together. And it's gorgeous, you know, but he had never seen the goddamn thing. And I said, well, look, I'll go out and I'll find us a show. Because why not? I got a big mouth, as you can tell. I went out there, and in my neighborhood in Bushwick, I went out and tried to find a couple of pop-ups, but they were all too expensive. So I go by Brooklyn Fireproof, where I know the guy that runs that. And I say, look, how about I pitch you a show? And he says, well, let me show you what I got. I'm walking around his space, and I'm really not politically correct. I'm looking at his stuff, and I'm going, well, he shows me his work. He says, sorry, Bert, I hate your work. It's not good. I'm just not a fan. And he takes me to his gallery, and it's beat up. I go, wow, you got this. And he's showing this really shit work. I said, God, you got this great space. Why are you showing all this shit? Everybody I work with is better than this. At which point he said, prove it. At which point I've been talking out my ass because I knew Chris Ketchy's work, I knew my work, but the other 20 some odd people, I just knew they were smart and fun. And now I had to put their work together and prove it. And when I'm putting their work together, I then go by this place called Art Helix, who had put me in a couple of shows, mostly because of my dog. And I'm not kidding. He put me in a show in Portland, Maine. He said I could go there as long as I brought the dog. So I go to him and I say, look, Burr's going to give us a show. How about you? And he says, good. Burr doesn't know when he's going to do it, but here, this is October 15th. January 1st, you got a show. So I got 6 weeks to put together a show, get everybody's stuff together, and we did. I have now either curated or participated in 18 shows in the last 16 months, and I've got 5 more online for next year, because these guys are just that fucking good. So, and that's it. And now that's basically what I do. I just carve lines in the plexiglass, tell my life story, and that's about it. Okay?
So do we have any questions for Norton? Does anybody want to know more about what makes him tick? No? Okay. Well, we'll move on to the next talk. We're going to have artist Cornelia Jensen discuss some of her work. So as you have probably noticed, this large styrofoam installation to my right is her work. So if we can move our party over there. So and as the artists have been laying out, but it becomes very clear in this exhibition overall, light really comes in to transform our realities. It becomes a kind of symbolic way to see the world, but also a physical way to interact with the world. So I think that comes through even more so in some of Cornelia's work. So she's going to discuss her process.
Hi. As you can see, it looks like a city, but I didn't go into this with the idea of I want to make a small city. That was sort of the final result. Louder. Do you need a microphone? Is there one? No. I'll try to be louder. It's a big space. Basically, when I was very young, I had a hard time throwing anything away that was not biodegradable. I just the first toothpaste tube I used up. I was just like, well, what am I supposed to do with this now? I mean, it's like throw it in the garbage. Throw it in the garbage, but then what happens to it? It's so it all started with the first toothpaste tube, and I save things that aren't biodegradable. Actually, I save things that are biodegradable as well, shellac them or something like that. But so I've been a collector my whole life, just collect stuff, collect things that somehow strike my fancy, either natural things or man-made things. And just over the years, it evolved into, and I also drew and painted my whole life too. I was primarily an illustrator and a painter. But after years and years, I wanted to integrate collage. Like when you think of collage, you think of cutout magazines and colored paper and things like that. But then if you use objects, it becomes assemblage, which is basically a form of collage. It's just three-dimensional. So the idea of mixing paint and collage was another challenge for years. Like, how do I do that successfully? And I tried for years, and I was not happy with the results. It looked like crap. And eventually it took shape, where now I finally feel like I'm at a place where I can mix paint and objects and materials in a way that I finally feel like I'm doing what I should be doing. I've been trying for years to get to this point. When I went to art school, it was for grad school. I majored in philosophy in regular college, and then went to art school and majored in film video, actually. But in the meantime, I always painted and drew, and stuck with the traditional arts, photography, sculpture, all that kind of stuff. 20 years later, I didn't get my degree until 20 years later because I dropped out my last semester and just was supposed to for my MFA, and I was almost I did the last semester. Then there was this whole snafu where they took away credits I'd earned, which is also money, as we all know. Credits cost a lot of money, especially in art school. So 20 years later, I decided I should just get my MFA. I was so close. I was literally like a couple credits away. So now, of course, 20 years later, the credits are 3 times as expensive as they were 20 years earlier. But I did it, wrote this thesis, decided to write on James Turrell because at that point I was interested in light art, and I hadn't worked on film in years, like at least 12 years or something like that. So I was like, well, maybe I'll write it on light art because that's kind of like film. I don't really want to write on film. So I wrote on James Turrell, decided to find out about him. I didn't know anything about him. I just sort of picked him out. Someone mentioned him. I said, oh, okay, I'll study him for my thesis. And that was where it really took off for me, doing the light art. I'd sort of experimented in the past with film projection and light box, architectural settings, but in our human scale, like life scale. I lived in this place in San Francisco where we built out a warehouse and turned into this film lounge called the WearPad. And a group of us, but mostly 3 of us really worked on, 2 of us actually built the place. And it had balconies that were light boxes, light box furniture, rear projection screens, a main screen. We'd show films, we'd show multiple films at once. A lot of people compared it to like the factory. We had a tinfoil ceiling in this one area. All that. We had parties and events all the time. And it was a really an ever-changing environment. We constantly redid parts of it, and we'd have, every weekend we showed movies, every Friday, Saturday. Then sometimes we'd have a big event with other artists and bands, and we made movies there. So that was sort of the pinnacle of my time in San Francisco. I went there for art school, stayed, and then eventually came back to New York, where I'm originally from. I was fortunate because growing up, my father was a painter on the side, and my parents took me to museums and encouraged me and my brothers to do art and be artists and musicians. They never were the kind of parents that talk you out of it, like, no, you should study business, don't do. Never. They were the opposite. They always encouraged us to be artists. So I was very fortunate to just be encouraged from day one. So I was basically an artist my whole life. It was never a choice I made. It was just what I always was. So years later, after collecting things and making things my whole life, I was writing my thesis about James Turrell. This is about 7 or 8 years ago. And I went out to Roden Crater, because I don't know if you know, but James Turrell bought a crater in Arizona. And he does, well, actually, I was looking at this when you were talking about James Turrell. I was thinking about his, James Turrell does these spaces where one of the things he does is he creates rooms where you're basically looking through what he calls an aperture. So it's kind of like an eye or a camera. You're looking through an aperture, which is often a rectangle, just a rectangular shape like a frame. And you're looking into a space that's filled with light. You don't see where the light's coming from. You just see this volume, and it gives the effect. He's all about sort of creating presence. He and Robert Irwin were both very much about making art about presence. So it's just light in a space, but it has volume. So you start to associate volume and solid and non-solid materials become one, and it's all about like your perception. It's like, what is my perception? Am I perceiving that I'm perceiving? It gets very Cartesian. Anyway, I started thinking just now when you were talking about, if you look in some of the window spaces like that one over there, it's almost like these mini James Turrell spaces. This is really about scale, this piece. Each piece, when I was writing about James Turrell, my teacher said, well, what about you? What about your art? And I was like, oh, I guess I should do some light art then, since I'm writing about James Turrell. So I started doing this, and I'm doing it ever since. Wall pieces, we started with wall pieces like that. And I pretty much stick with just the white styrofoam and green grass, and just try, or blue water, like pool, swimming pool water, because everything is very architectonic to me. All these pieces, I find them, and I look into them, and I go into this world that's a different scale. I see, there's some pieces I didn't even use in this arrangement that, like, if you stare into it, it's like this house that you can walk through. It's just the whole, I see spaces in there that I want to walk in. I want to walk in there. That's kind of how this evolved out of that. And a friend of mine used to take pictures of it when I first started doing it. He would get these amazing photos, but really close up, and it would really look like some fabulous architecture in this space. So this is kind of my dream city, but at the same time, some people find it very scary. They're like, oh, it's kind of scary. It's like the future, utopia and hell are kind of like, there's a fine line between the two, because you don't see any humans. It's just, I think it's ideal because you don't see any humans, but I think that's also what makes it creepy to people. So it's different for everybody. Some of you might think it's like, oh, I'd like to be there, and some of you might think, oh, God, I'd never want to be there. So I'd be curious to see what people have to say. I could talk about all kinds of things, but I'll answer questions at this point. Anybody have any questions?
So depending upon where you installed, it's very flexible.
Yes.
But those back board where you put against that board, and you knew exactly how it would look when you came to see the space.
Kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, I categorize the styrofoam into certain types of pieces that serve different functions.
Right.
Like some I know I'm going to use horizontally, some I know I'm going to use vertically, some are for under things and behind things and to support other things, and some things are going to be some feature section.
So very flexible in terms of which pieces you would choose, except knowing this is a city or metropolis that you're thinking of. So it has to have, building as a background in a way.
Well, because I've done this same exhibit a few times in different spaces, and it's always different every time I do it, and it depends on the space. Like if Jonathan or you had said, oh, you're going to do your piece in the middle of the room, it would have been different. It wouldn't be so tall probably, maybe, but I don't know. I've never really, the only one I've ever done where it was open on three sides was in a store window, and it was a much smaller scale, but that was almost harder because when it's that small and you're up closer to it, I really make an effort so you don't see the chords. I want it to be completely mysterious. I want it to be all vertical and horizontal and plumb, So I get very obsessive about putting in each piece, and I'll do a trial and error with 3 different pieces in the same spot until I find the right one. So every piece here has been a process. Every single part that I put here was like a whole process getting to that spot. It doesn't just, you saw before it set up, it was a pile of styrofoam. It was like a big junk pile of styrofoam. It looked like a bunch of garbage. And then it becomes the opposite of garbage. Cities are sort of the ultimate creation of humankind, and more so. So this is kind of a satire of that in a way.
Interestingly though, Jonathan, are you the one who changed things around? Where are you?
Added one thing.
Jonathan,
He's over there.
Without the artist's presence.
Oh yeah.
How did you do that?
Well, that was a freak curatorial accident.
And I don't know how you did it.
Yeah. But I had to somehow leverage my body over the already constructed landscape here and fit in that tiny little wedge of a piece right there. And I was very proud of myself because I think it goes together very well. I think it reminded me almost of something that would come out of Mies van der Rohe or something with the little sidewall or something on one
You're
of
with
his.
me when I saw it.
Yeah.
Of course, I immediately saw it. I was like, oh, thank God it looks good at least.
Yeah. And it was out of necessity because how bright the light was that was casting underneath it actually was shooting a glare all the way over to the wall where Takafumi Ide's piece was, or is still. So.
I noticed how things changed
Yeah.
from the day one. I said, oh, I wonder if she came to,
No, I was.
change.
I don't know how you did it.
Found out that
Yeah,
year.
that's the biggest challenge with curating this group of work was allowing certain pieces to be on their own and not having light from one piece kind of creep in on the next, giving each piece its own space and its own room to breathe almost. So that was a big concern, definitely. Okay. Oh, Sunil.
I mean, the thing that can very easily, go awry with a piece like this is that different parts have different scale and proportions, and this one does not. So I assume
That
you
didn't
picked.
go awry.
It did not go awry. No, it can easily go awry but it absolutely has not, because I've been looking at it for several days every time I've been here, and everything is in proportion. As if I assume you pick the pieces to make sure that the scale doesn't conflict, right?
Scale is very important.
So
It's
when
very
you're doing a
much
smaller
part-
piece, that must really be a challenge then.
I mean, a piece like that,
Yeah.
in the end, it looks very simple.
Yeah.
And I don't carve any, it's all found shapes. And ultimately, it is very simple, but it took a long time getting to that point.
Right.
It's a lot of experimentation. It's a lot of just like trying different things, trying different light, like moving the light in different places and how much light, because there might be one little strip of LED like this long, or it might be 3 different ones that long, or one longer, it could be all different. It's a lot of experimentation in these things.
No, because that
Whereas
is the
this
thing
is a
that you
whole
have back
spontaneous
here.
experience.
That little piece with the little water and everything, it's just it's completely in proportion with everything else, including the plants. Otherwise, it could just very easily look completely out of.
I mean, it's of course not in perfect proportion, but it's in proportion enough that what it's saying is what it's saying the right thing. It's saying the right scale. So yeah, there's certain pieces like this and that and that and that and that and that are individual pieces that were made as a piece, and then I integrate them into the whole. But they could be just a separate piece on their own too. And I like the idea that they could be, everything could be wall mounted or mounted like tabletop or wall. Like it could go either way. That's how I see all the pieces.
See, that piece is a surrealistic presentation for me. By looking at the water, and then another level is water.
Yeah, Yuko likes this piece a lot. And she didn't even notice what the fun part of it, because she's so short. She saw it the first time and saw there's a horizon in the window here. Like you're looking out and you're seeing the ocean horizon in the sky. And then there's the same thing up here. So there's 2 different horizon views out these windows. But she didn't know there was one up there because she's just short enough that she didn't see the water. So I don't know, maybe later she stood on her toes or something. But it's I had a dollhouse when I was young, and it was very big, and every window was sort of against the wall, but there's maybe a few inches from the back of the house to the wall. So I found different pictures out of Architectural Digest magazines or something, like gardens and forests, and I pasted them on the wall behind the house. So every window had a little view outside, but they were all different views. They didn't correspond, and I was really aware, because I'm very anal about things, and at first I'm like, oh, but it all has to correspond, like the woods have to turn it. And then I was like, no, it can just be a different view out of every. It was like a big decision I made when I was a kid. So this was kind of reminiscent to me of that decision, like I'm going to make 2 horizons, and it's just, so each window has its own view, and that's just going to be the way it's going to be. And if you notice it, you notice it. If you don't, you don't. So.
I saw you unloading the styrofoam.
While I was sitting in the car.
Outside.
Outside. I don't know whether I actually did roll my eyes, but I probably did.
Oh no.
Yeah. And when I saw it put together, and then when I saw the lights and things, all I can think of is I want to be inside it.
That's exactly how I feel. Glad
I want to be inside it.
you relate. And it's very clean. I don't collect dirty or broken styrofoam. Very particular.
Okay, so I think that pretty much closes out our talk for today. So thank you to the artists for talking, and thank you for everyone for coming and listening to them and getting the insight on their work and their process. For the rest of the time, I think we're going until 6 o'clock. You can circulate and look more at the work, but that's about it. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody who came over here and then hear the lectures. Wonderful lectures. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Unless
Thank you for
gave
having us.
We don't know much behind the scenes. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
So,
And a dancer.
and then thank you for coming to audience too. Thank you very, very much. And of course, I thank Jonathan.